Number 10. Iron Man. I mean, Iron Man has come such a long way since that first classic appearance. He was basically just a guy in a big metal silver suit after all. Now he's a guy in, well, a big metal silver suit that isn't quite so bulky and actually has a few coats of paint on it. This is because when we first met Tony Stark as Iron Man, he was wearing his very first suit, in issue number 39 of Tales of Suspense. Here, we'd get his origin story, which would explain how Tony Stark was captured and made the suit under the guise of building weapons of war for his captors. When really, he was building the suit to help keep him alive and also help him in his escape. This suit, of course, was built for a specific purpose, that of survival. But over the years, Tony would modify his design and improve upon it, even building various suits for specific events as might be needed depending on the circumstances. His most iconic look, though, often still involves him wearing his slightly more modern, though still classic colors of red and yellow. He went from silver to gold to red and yellow, I believe, although now he has more modern coloring in terms of the red and yellow colors. His armor appears a lot more metallic red and gold, which I love. Although I'm sure in the classic comics it was also supposed to be metallic red and gold, but we just have more advanced, I feel like, color tech in the future. Color tech. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here on Top 10 Nerd, and if you love hearing about some heroes that you might not be as familiar with or you might not recognize anymore, we also have a playlist where we show you some alternate versions, so go see some other characters that you might not know about now. Number 9. Green Arrow. Green Arrow literally looked like Robin Hood back in the day. Well, minus the now more Robin Hood style goatee that he now sports, because back then I feel like he was usually more clean shaven. Green Arrow is Oliver Queen. Technically his first appearance is no longer even the same Ollie that we have today in the comics, instead relegated to the alternate reality of Earth 2. But still, he was the original Green Arrow, and so if we are talking about classic looks in terms of first appearances, which is exactly what I'm trying to do here, Oliver has made a lot of progress in comparison to his first look and his first self. Currently, Oliver Queen in the Prime Earth main continuity of DC Comics has a much more modern look to him. Well, of course, like I said, minus that classic looking goatee and mustache combo, which is very Robin Hood to me. No longer does he wear a bright green suit with red boots and gloves. Instead, he wears body armor that, while still kinda green, is much more muted in tone. And sometimes he wears reddish bracers, which is kind of a throwback to the classic look, but even then, the colors are about where we draw the line when it comes to similarities to that classic look. Well, and obviously he still fights with a bow, because he is Green Arrow, but that I don't think will ever change. That would be weird if he was like, and now I'm Green Arrow, but I fight with a machete. I'd be like, that's really random, but alright. Unless it's a machete that he can like shoot like an arrow. Number 8. Thor. Thor has always looked super classic when it comes to his Norse heritage, but now he looks even more cosmic, despite really having always been, as the Asgardians are not people from the past but are instead considered to be aliens of a kind, simply posing as gods on Midgard, aka Earth, where humans once prayed to Odin and the others. I'm sure some still do, seeing them as godlike figures. I mean, in essence, they are still considered gods, but they're also aliens because they're, cosmic, but also divine. I would say that over the years, Thor's stories and overall appearance and costume have also greatly embraced his cosmic origins more and more. Thor also made his first appearance in Journey into Mystery issue number 83, where he also looked a mite smaller compared to his modern day self. I feel like that Thor is so like, the Thor we have now is like, oh, he's like super deezed. And especially if we consider the Thor and Hulk crossover event Banner of War, Thor also hulks out here himself and even shattered the Bifrost again after becoming infected by Bruce Banner. So there he might look totally different because you'd be like, what? Thor's the Hulk? What's happening? Number 7. Crimson Avenger. I mean, most people might not even recognize the Crimson Avenger just because they don't know him. He's quite a classic hero, appearing on what I believe was DC's second superhero team ever, the Seven Soldiers of Victory, which made their first appearance back in the early 1940s in Leading Comics issue number 1. Here, Crimson Avenger was Lee Walter Travis. He appeared here sporting a super form-fitting red outfit with a fin on top and yellow underwear over top, as well as yellow boots to match. This look would seemingly endure until Travis met his end in DC Comics Presents issue number 38. Here, the question of what happened to him would be answered, and we learn after being diagnosed with an incurable disease, Lee decided to don his costume one more time and sacrifice himself to save others. Now, while this might might sound like his original costume because it did sort of come into play super early on, his original costume, however, actually hails from even further back than the 1940s. The Crimson Avenger actually made his first appearance in the late 1930s in Detective Comics issue number 20. Here he sported a suit underneath a red cape with a matching red wide-brimmed hat and wielding dual pistols. He died back in the 80s looking very different in comparison to his first appearance, and I guess now you really wouldn't recognize him at all because I don't think we've seen a new Crimson Avenger since, with him remaining dead in regards to comic continuity. Tell me if I'm wrong on that one, but I can't think of a Prime Earth appearance that I've seen. Crimson Avenger? Is he in the Prime Earth? You tell me. Number 6. Robin. Jason Todd was once known as Robin. At the time, he was a hero, and while quite stubborn and brash, he did his best to live up to the mantle working alongside Batman. Eventually, however, Jason would end up leaving Wayne Manor and go on a search for his birth mother. During this time, Batman would once again find him just as Jason would find his birth mother. But unfortunately, the Joker would also find Batman and Jason, secretly blackmailing Jason's mother, and in the end, Jason and his mom would end up as the Joker's victims. Jason would seemingly not survive this incident despite Batman's rush to come to his aid. However, many years later, we learn with the re-emergence of Red Hood that Jason actually hadn't died here, but had managed to survive and return to life and later Gotham using his new identity, Red Hood. Gone are the days when Jason Todd acted as Batman's sidekick Robin, and in his place was Red Hood. At first a seeming villain, then an anti-hero who was unafraid to kill and fought with guns, and now currently a brutal vigilante who instead fights with a crowbar because symbolism. I actually really like Jason fighting with a crowbar, but I don't know, how do you guys feel about that?
At number 5 is the Green Goblin, aka Norman Osborn. As if this villain wasn't enough of a contender for Spidey to deal with before, he actually takes on the Carnage symbiote, turning him into the Red Goblin, as mentioned before. This makes him nearly unstoppable, forcing the good guys to employ anti-venom on him in order to take him out for good. And even though he has since gone back to being the Green Goblin, the character takes another turn that makes him unrecognizable from his past self during the events of Kindred Rising. And by unrecognizable, I mean that he's now working with Spider-Man. When Sin Eater cleanses Norman of his sins, his allegiances change and he becomes a hero. At number 4 we have Dr. Doom. These days, Dr. Doom has taken on some pretty unstoppable powers that some would even describe as being godlike. Big fans of Victor Von Doom might have expected him to reach a point like this at some point because of his insatiable hunger for power, but as of 2022, he's already surpassed at least my expectations of what he was capable of. Although they haven't stuck around until the time that we're posting this, he has taken the powers of the Silver Surfer and even the Beyonder, giving him a whole new mantle of God Emperor Doom during the Secret Wars storyline. Just for scale, this gave Dr. Doom the ability to piece together broken pieces of the universe after the multiversal collapse. And that's a pretty crazy glow up if you ask me. And even if he doesn't hold quite that much power these days, having had that ability has changed the character forever, if you ask me. At number 3 is Darkseid. Originally introduced as a nearly unstoppable supervillain and one of the most powerful in the whole DC universe, Darkseid's powers have been dumbed down quite a bit since then. Although he appears the same, his immense power level just isn't the same these days as it always was. For example, his eye beams were originally meant to kill his targets in one hit, but these days, they don't by any means take out their targets in one hit. He used to be almost unbeatable, but it seems like heroes are making easier work of him than ever as of late. This is probably a result of him appearing more often in the comics, because if he'd kept his same unstoppable status, his appearances would have to be regulated, or else our heroes would be out of commission in the blink of an eye. At number 2 is Anti-Monitor. Another case of a villain getting nerfed. Anti-Monitor's gotten it bad these days. If you thought Darkseid got taken down a notch, just think how much room there would be to do the same with Anti-Monitor, because he is, after all, the most powerful being in the DC multiverse. Just to get an idea of what I mean, back in the day, Anti-Monitor takes out multiple universes alone before he reaches ours, and then once he does, it takes a hell of a lot to take him down. In fact, it became one of the most notable moments in all of the DC comics when they did, because it was so difficult. But when he returns from his defeat and joins the Sinestro Corps, he just seems to be in a totally different echelon of power, a lesser one. to the point where the Justice League can take him out on their own these days, which is just weird to see for fans who knew his power level back in the day. At number 1 is the Batman who laughs. Enough with the downgrades, because this guy's change is a glow up if I've ever seen one. These days, the Batman who laughs has gained so much power that he's known to be basically godlike, and he finds these new powers in the place that he comes from, the Dark Multiverse. After finding a Dr. Manhattan-powered Batman in the Dark Multiverse, the Batman who laughs gets his mind transferred into the body of that hero, acquiring the greater part of Dr. Manhattan's abilities, but with the sinister touch of his usual self as well. The only way that he's able to be taken down is when Wonder Woman finds a way to match his power level herself and defeats him despite his insane power boost.
Number 10. Harley Quinn. Harley Quinn was created in the classic 90s Batman animated series where she was the Joker's main henchwench and girlfriend. She proved so popular that she was brought into the main comic book continuity, where she was dressed pretty much the same as she was in the animated show, with a red and black jester costume. Over the years, both her look and personality have evolved as she has broken away from the Joker and become her own person, who is a bit more of an anti-hero at this point. Although her color scheme has remained the same, she now has a bit more of a wild look, wearing a red and black corset and leather jacket, letting her blonde hair with dyed pigtails flow free. It is a major difference, but there are other characters who have changed even more, which is why Harley is at the bottom of this list. Number 9. Paste Pot Pete. Originally, Pete used a glue gun to commit robberies while dressed in this rather strange green jumpsuit and purple beret. Paste Pot Pete is really Peter Petruski, a scientist who developed an advanced adhesive that made him very wealthy. However, he believed that a life of crime would be even more lucrative and began robbing banks and stealing missiles. He updated his costume a couple times, going for a more purple pouchy theme, and ended up changing his name to the Trapster after Spider-Man burst into hysterical laughter upon hearing the name Paste Pot Pete. He made some minor updates to his look in the following years, but eventually settled on a yellow and brown outfit that he still wears in his most recent appearance. None of his looks are particularly menacing, but if I saw his first look side by side with his second look and was told that one was called Paste Pot Pete and the other the Trapster, I would have no reason to think that they were the same villain, other than both using a similar weapon. But at the same time, so do Captain Cold and Mr. Freeze. Number 8. Hawkeye. In his first appearance in Tales of Suspense number 57, Clint Barton was a carnival worker who performed incredible trick shots with arrows. When the audience was unimpressed with his performance and booed him off stage, he became jealous when he saw Iron Man show up to save the day when one of the rides went haywire, much to the crowd's delight. He thinks to himself, "I'm the greatest marksman the world has ever known, and yet they ignore me." He decides that if he makes himself a few trick arrows, he will be just as respected as Iron Man, because a guy in a purple tunic and mask shooting arrows is just as impressive as a flying weaponized robot suit. He becomes a supervillain, going toe-to-toe with Iron Man. In the years since his first appearance, Hawkeye has gone from supervillain to superhero, and has had multiple identities and costumes, but in his most recent appearances, he has traded his more flashy, masked look for what is essentially just a black t-shirt with a purple arrow on it and some sunglasses. Without the context of the many years of stories between his first and most recent appearances, not only would you be confused as to his very different look, you'd also be surprised at how a supervillain is now one of the most frequent members of the Avengers. Number 7. The Riddler. Since his first appearance in Detective Comics number 140, the Riddler's gimmick has remained pretty much the same. He is hyper-intelligent and uses elaborate traps, puzzles, and of course riddles to prove that he is smarter than the Batman. His look has remained pretty consistent across media, with him wearing a green spandex bodysuit covered in question marks for much of his career. Other times, when he's feeling dapper, he wears a green suit and bowler hat. This has been his look in almost every comic, and when he was first adapted for live action in the 1960s television show, Frank Gorshin's costume felt ripped right from the pages of the comics, with him alternating between the spandex and green suit looks. When Jim Carrey took over the role for Batman Forever, it was very much the same. Even when the character showed up in Gotham, he was pretty faithful to the character's original look. However, when Matt Reeves decided to take a more grounded approach to the character in the recent The Batman movie, he had Paul Dano's Riddler in an unrecognizable style. Gone were the spandex, and in its place was a green raincoat and a winter combat mask. You know, it's funny, when I watched this movie with my parents, they hadn't seen any of the marketing, and when Riddler showed up in the opening moments of the film, it wasn't until they saw his first riddle that they realized who he was. It's a bold new look for a bold new take on the character, but if Riddler shows up in a sequel, I wouldn't mind if he went just a touch more classic with his look now that he's an established villain. I mean, there's nothing really that heightened about a guy wearing a green suit jacket. Number 6. Metallo. John Corbin was a very minor Superman villain who first appeared in Action Comics number 252 in 1959. In this story, he was a regular man who was in a car accident before being transformed by a scientist into a robot covered with foam latex which looked like flesh. He was given a kryptonite-powered heart, and he soon clashed with the Man of Steel. In his first appearance, he's just a guy with a pencil mustache wearing a suit, and there's nothing really notable about him. In fact, he dies in his first appearance. Once the New Earth continuity began, a revamped version of the character was introduced with probably his most iconic look. He was still a regular looking guy, but usually his skin would soon get torn off, and he would be seen as a menacing metal skeleton, not unlike the Terminator. In more recent appearances, he's in a more bulky mech suit with glowing green components. He is quite an underrated villain, but if you saw the current version or the skeleton version next to the original guy in a suit version, you'd have no reason to suspect all three were the same character.
Number 5. Ikaris. If we compare Ikaris' first appearance to his latest appearance in the comics, you'll definitely see a pretty big transformation. If we're just going with that first appearance. Ikaris makes his first appearance in issue number 1 of the Eternals, and while his golden locks may stay the same, his outfit has developed a lot more since what we see him in that first issue. We see him both disguised in civilian clothes and basically potentially wearing a little loincloth and booties, if he's the man flying across the panel that I'm thinking of. I'm pretty sure that's him. That guy also has golden locks and a similar look to Ikaris, or at least the attire that he is wearing has a similar look. It's pretty limited though. Ikaris in modern comics, whether we're talking about Kieran Gillen's latest and greatest Eternal series or the AXE Judgment Day event, wears a lot more clothes now. Although I will admit, on that first issue of Eternals, there is a little picture of him in his outfit. So sure, but I'm more talking about what happens in the issue. His civilian disguise, the sunglasses, the hat. More recently as well, his adaptation in the Marvel Cinematic Universe has him looking quite different additionally, where he was played by Richard Madden, showcasing him as a brunette instead of the more literal golden-locked golden boy. That iteration of the character also wore more blue and gold than his comic book counterpart, who lately is often draped in blue and red colors. That's more Ikaris in the comics. I guess they had to get the gold in there somewhere, you know what I mean? Number 4. The Flash. The Flash is not even the same person as he was originally. He isn't even from the same Earth either. Initially, Jay Garrick was the Flash, appearing back in Flash Comics issue number 1. Later on, a new Flash would be introduced to us, and we learned that the original Flash, Jay Garrick, actually existed on another world, known as Earth 2. Barry Allen's Flash would first appear back in the 1950s in Showcase issue number 4, and would continue to be a recurring mainstay in the comics throughout his history, up until today, where Barry is still around even now, and for many people he's still the Flash. Today, however, the more prominent Flash I would say currently in comics is Barry's nephew, Wally West. That's my Flash, but you know, I respect people that prefer Barry. Wally West as well is a completely different person and also happens to look totally different in terms of his outfit in comparison to the original Flash, Jay Garrick. All in all, the Flash has come a long way throughout the character's history, and while these are just the 3 main Flashes, the Flash family would also grow exponentially over time. So while they all might not be known as the Flash, there are also just tons of speedsters who are related to the Flashes running around. In fact, we should probably do a Flash family attempting to explain video, or a Speed Force attempting to explain video. That in and of itself, that concept, very interesting. Number 3, the Wasp. You might not recognize Janet Van Dyne anymore because I feel like, well, it's been a minute since we've actually seen her as a hero in the comics. Correct me if I am wrong, because I really want to be wrong on this, as you know, I haven't read everything, but I feel like Janet has been missing for quite a while in the comics, unless I'm wrong. Which is kind of surprising, considering she was originally one of the mainstays on the Avengers. I've seen her appear as a friend to Jen and She-Hulk in her civilian form when she lent Jen an apartment, and I know she was dating Iron Man kinda recently, but that's about all I can think of when it comes to Wasp. And I mean, she's not dating Iron Man now because he was with Hellcat, I think, last I checked. What is Iron Man's dating history? So strange. Fortunately, Jan is getting her own solo series. Well, she's gonna share it, but you know, the Wasp is getting their own solo series. Possibly the very first Wasp solo series ever as of 2023, which seems crazy to me. I hope I'm wrong on that one. This series will be shared with Nadia Van Dyne, who is also currently known as the Wasp in the comics. Janet first appeared in issue number 44 of Tales to Astonish alongside Ant-Man, and since then has had quite the evolution when it comes to her look, ditching the Ant-Man coordinated red for a bright yellow and black suit. Nadia also is technically a totally new character who took up the mantle, so totally different person. Despite her full name, she is the daughter of Hank Pym from his first marriage, who grew up imprisoned in Russia. After escaping and coming to America, she learned that her father was dead, but Janet still lived. Bonding with her stepmother, Nadia was inspired to take up her last name instead, which she did with Jan's blessing. Also becoming known as a hero, the Unstoppable Wasp, which also obviously Janet was like, yeah, you can be the Wasp, I'm cool with it. Number 2, Green Lantern. Green Lantern, like the Flash, isn't even really the same person anymore if we are comparing modern day to classic. In fact, unlike the Flash in the main continuity event, Green Lantern has more than one modern counterpart. Who was the original Green Lantern? Well, that would be Alan Scott. Alan Scott made his first appearance in All American Comics issue number 16, where he looked very different from our modern day Green Lanterns, and at the same time even kind of was a completely different Green Lantern in terms of, you know, where his powers came from and kind of how they worked, at least until later on when his power's origin was somewhat retconned. The modern day Green Lantern I'm sure most would think of is Hal Jordan, but there has also been Guy Gardner, John Stewart, Kyle Rayner, Jessica Cruz, and more recently Joe Moline, one of my favorite Green Lanterns, and that's just some of the mainstays of the Green Lanterns who hailed from Earth. There are a lot more as well. We've really expanded on Green Lanterns. So now when you say Green Lantern, I feel like instead of people being like, oh yeah, Alan Scott, or oh yeah, Hal Jordan even, people are like, which one are we talking about? Number 1, Miss Marvel. Miss Marvel was originally introduced to us in the comics as Carol Danvers in the late 60s. Carol herself worked with the US military as a member of the Air Force before becoming a security officer for NASA. It was there that she would meet her super heroic mentor and at one point her love interest, Mar-Vell. Eventually, Carol would get powers of her own in the 70s, debut as a superhero herself known as Miss Marvel. Based on that first appearance of the heroic character, we've come a long way in terms of her appearance and even who she is as a person. Carol isn't even Miss Marvel anymore, having gone on to take up the much passed around mantle of Captain Marvel in honor of the late Mar-Vell himself. Although as I said, it wouldn't just be Carol and Mar-Vell that would use the name Captain Marvel. With Miss Marvel available though, Carol ended up giving her blessing for Kamala Khan, Carol's #1 fan, to use the mantle as she started on her own heroic journey. In the comics, Kamala is known as an Inhuman with the power to basically modify her form and shapeshift to an extent.
So we're all familiar with Trapster, right? Peter Petruski, the incredibly intelligent chemist who fights with pretty much a high-powered glue gun as well as other adhesives. Well, there's a mysterious woman taking on his moniker. Not much is known about this new Trapster, but she's actually the third person to take on this name. Cool thing about her is that she ditched the E in Trapster because who needs the E? It's 2022. It just looks cooler. This version of Trapster first appeared rudely interrupting a fight between Spider-Man and Vulture, and she robbed the winged villain of money he had just stolen. This may have seemed like a good thing, but she didn't give the money back. She's now a member of the all-female crime syndicate, the Sinister Syndicate, having been recruited by Beetle.
Number 9, Sin Eater. Sin Eater is Stanley Carter. While his costume may have remained somewhat the same, actually pretty much the same, his appearance more recently in the comics drastically changed after he was resurrected by Kindred, who were actually revealed to be the twins. The twins being Sarah and Gabriel Stacy, who in turn were revealed to be clones created from the genetic materials of Gwen Stacy and Norman Osborn. So, not their naturally born offspring. Yay. Then Sin Eater died, then was resurrected again. The second time Stanley was brought back after he'd taken his own life, he appeared in a zombie-like state, making him almost unrecognizable from his usual appearance, barring the fact that his costume has remained pretty much the same since his first appearance. Although after rising from the grave the second time, his costume is pretty tattered, so I really think some people might have been like, who dis?
So, as we stated before, there is a new channel we have out now called Most Amazing Top 10 Anime, so if you're into that sort of thing, give us a follow and subscribe. We're putting out videos every day. This next master of the hunt is the ruthless son of Sergei Kravenov, simply known as Kraven the Hunter. the last son of Kraven. Sergei Kravinoff, the original Kraven, wanted to carry on his legacy, so instead of having more children, because that would just take too long, plus he already has a daughter, he decided to create a whole lot of clones of himself, 87 to be exact, and attempted to train them in the ways of the hunt. Well, this current Kraven got his title by murdering all his brothers, which, hey, if you want to prove you're the apex predator, killing 87 clones of Kraven the Hunter is a great way to start your career, isn't it? He also saved the skulls and brought them before his proud dad. The son made his dad even more proud when he strangled his father to death while he was disguised as Spider-Man, thereby breaking his curse of immortality. The son has now taken on his father's moniker, Kraven the Hunter, as well as his actual name. Good job, buddy.
Number 7. Kaine Parker. Kaine Parker was initially a clone of Spider-Man who, yes, was considered to be, kinda evil. Chiefly because Kaine didn't have any qualms with killing people, leaving them with his mark of Kaine, which typically was used to kinda like burn the face of his victims. And also because he had long hair and was more moody than Spider-Man, which is a feat because Spider-Man's a pretty moody dude. In reality, the mark of Kaine was actually just Kaine using his spider climbing like little hooks on his hand, as we saw showcased visually in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, to burn his victims' faces. Kaine was also seen as evil because he was mentally unstable, having been a defective clone who was rapidly deteriorating, which basically affected his mind. However, Kaine is now known as Scarlet Spider and has a completely different look and attitude when compared to his original appearance and presentation in the comics. While still being, you know, somewhat edgy because he's still Kaine, he's definitely still more of a hero now in the comics than he ever was before.
The original Super-Adaptoid, created by Advanced Idea Mechanics, or AIM, was originally a villain facing off against Captain America, Iron Man, and of course the Avengers, also going up against the X-Men. It was able to mimic and visually copy anything it wanted, giving it a hero's abilities and powers. But in Amazing Spider-Man 900, however, Spidey faces off against a different version of this shape-shifting entity known as the Sinister Adaptoid. This version of the character sports a brand new look, most prominently featuring Doc Ock's tentacles, but there are other visual elements in the character's design as well. The Sinister Adaptoid is an amalgamation of sorts of, you guessed it, the Sinister Six, having the abilities of Doc Ock, Vulture, Kraven, Mysterio, Sandman, and Electro. The Sinister Six had been captured by the Living Brain, and their powers and sentience combined to form the villain. So if you thought these guys were strong on their own, imagine going up against all of them at once. Spider-Man actually needed help the real Sinister Six in order to take this abomination down. Go figure. Also, I love when villains like team up with the hero just to like, because they both hate the same person. It's just fun.
Number 5. Killer Croc. We got our first look at Waylon Jones, aka Killer Croc, in Detective Comics number 524. In this version, he had a medical condition that gave his skin a rough, scaly appearance, earning him the nickname Killer Croc. In his first appearance, Croc is actually pretty cunning, being able to rise almost to the top of the Gotham underworld. His physical appearance is also pretty tame, being gray and scaly but still clearly a human being. As he made subsequent appearances, not only did he get dumber, but his look became more and more exaggerated until he eventually looked like an actual crocodile, with green scales, sharp teeth, and sometimes even a tail. His size in the original comics is large, but still within believable human proportions, whereas at this point, he is so tall that it's hard to imagine any skin condition resulting in a villain like Croc. Number 4. The Green Goblin. Arguably Spider-Man's greatest foe is the Green Goblin. First appearing all the way back in Amazing Spider-Man number 14, the Green Goblin had a pretty consistent look for most of his career, sporting a purple and green costume with a horrifying grinning goblin mask with a purple hat. He flies around on a bat-shaped glider and throws exploding pumpkins at Spidey. Over the years, Norman Osborn has had a few different aliases and therefore costumes, such as the Iron Patriot and the Goblin King, but it's usually not long before he's back in the green duds. More recently though, he's trying to be a hero and is wearing a white and gold bodysuit and going by the name name Gold Goblin. The glider kind of gives it away, but based purely on the costume, would you think this is the same guy? If that's not different enough for you, just take a look at the Green Goblin in the Ultimate Universe, where he is more like a Hulk than the classic villain. Number 3. Victor Fries. This classic Batman villain was very different in his first appearance in Batman Volume 1, number 121. He was a scientist who suffered an accident that forced him to wear a specialized cryosuit that kept his body temperature below freezing. He soon began committing crimes not as Mr. Freeze, but as Mr. Zero. His original look was a green and pink bodysuit with a bubble-shaped helmet feeding him cold air. When the character was adapted for the 60s television show, he was renamed Mr. Freeze, and this name eventually was brought over into the comics. His look began to evolve closer to how we now know him, but he remained a rather C-list villain until the 90s animated series revamped his origin to be a tragic figure trying to find a cure for his sick wife. This interpretation was so popular that it was also brought into the comics. The character is now very different from his original appearances, but it is interesting to see how much he has changed over the years due to his adaptations in other media. Number 2. Catwoman. I know, there are a lot of Batman villains on this list, but that is mostly because they tend to be a much more consistent group of villains than a lot of other heroes have, and also because they're the best comic book rogues gallery by a country mile. First appearing all the way back in Batman number 1 in 1940, Catwoman was very similar to her modern personality, being a brazen and flirtatious cat burglar. In this first story, however, she doesn't dress as a cat, but instead uses various disguises to steal a jeweled necklace from a boat and is simply known as the Cat. In her next appearance in Batman number 2, she is still not wearing a full-on costume, but is referred to as Catwoman for the first time. When she shows up again in Batman number 3, she finally gets a costume consisting of a long flowing yellow dress, a red cape, and a literal cat head mask. In Batman number 35, her costume evolves more into something that we today would recognize as Catwoman, with a purple dress, green cape, and less intense cat mask. The look stayed the same after that for a few decades until the comics took some inspiration from her look in the 60s TV show, and she ended up in the skin-tight catsuit that has evolved into the look we all know and love today. Number 1. Thunderbolt Ross. For most of his history, since Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross first appeared in Incredible Hulk number 1, he has remained pretty much the same. He's an angry mustachioed general obsessed with capturing or killing the Hulk. He stayed this way for decades, being a constant antagonist in the Hulk stories, but the status quo changed in 2008 when he joined the group of villains known as the Intelligentsia, who helped transform Ross into the Red Hulk. Since then, Red Hulk has been both villain and hero, but if you saw the original Ross next to the Red Hulk, you would have no reason to suspect that they are one and the same.
At number 10, we have Dreamer, or Dream Girl, who doesn't quite resemble the way she used to appear in the original comics. That's because in the CW series Supergirl, Neuronal is now Neonal, and aside from her costume making a decent change, the character is actually quite different as well. Most notably, Dreamer is known to be the first transgender superhero to appear on TV, played by Nicole Maines, who is herself a transgender activist. But that's not all. The character is also quite a bit younger, and I mean, her hair isn't even blonde anymore, which I think is fair to note. She doesn't look quite the same. But either way, from the name change to the costume change to even an entire color palette shift, Dream Girl, now Dreamer, has metamorphosized into someone completely different. At number 9, we have Elongated Man. Not the most widely popular superhero to begin with, Elongated Man takes a rough turn in the Arrowverse when his costume is entirely reimagined in The Flash in one of the worst ways possible. Although he's sort of played off as a joke character in both the comics and the Flash series, it's still sad to see such an unimaginative portrayal of any hero, really. Although Ralph Dibny is mostly out of costume, he becomes known to be the worst dressed within the narrative of the show as well, throwing more oil on the fire of Elongated Man's memeability. But even aside from the costume, the character just appears much less boisterous than he typically does, with a younger disposition and somehow a down-to-earth vibe, even though he's Elongated Man. At least in the way that he appears serious while he's in costume, a total departure from the goofy, exaggerated image associated with Elongated Man in the comics. At number 8, we have Swamp Thing. This newer version of the character from Infinite Frontier is just insane. With the new host Levi Kamei, Swamp Thing takes a whole new turn in how he's presented. Well, not entirely. To be fair, Swamp Thing has always kind of been this big, nasty green monster, but something about this modern depiction of how the green takes over Levi's body turns what used to look like a big green beast into a massive green spaghetti monster, it looks like. An extremely terrifying spaghetti monster, to be exact. Although the character doesn't appear for long in the short-lived series, this is the most recent update we have on the Swamp Thing, and he's surely taken on a different vibe than he used to. At number 7 is Connor Kent. Con-El is one of the many people to take on the mantle of Superboy, and it seems like his look has changed more than your average hero. He's also known to be a clone of another more real son of Superman, which I suppose leads him to run into some identity issues, which could be part of it. But he most often appears to look like this high school bad boy with the spiked leather jacket look, but he's also got the black and red supersuit, and at times has also presented a lot like the classic Superman with the blue, red, and yellow costume as well. But that's kind of my point. It's hard to know whether you're looking at Con-El or John Kent, or even another Superboy from an alternate dimension, because he doesn't seem to have decided on one look, and he's pretty hard to recognize, especially these days as his time goes by. At number 6 we have Wonder Woman. Now, a couple newer comics make this hero a bit different than what we're used to. During a one-shot in 2020 called Future State, the Wonder Woman mantle is taken on by Yara Flor, who takes the place of Princess Diana while she's away for a time. Sporting a totally new costume with a handful of different weapons, this iteration of the hero just gives us a totally new look at who Wonder Woman could be. More recently, near the end of 2021, a younger iteration of Yara Flor appears in the Infinite Frontier series as Wonder Girl, offering the new status quo of what the DC universe might look like moving forward. But aside from the Wonder Woman mantle being taken on by a new character, there is another series that leads right up until the end of 2021 called Wonder Woman Black and Gold, in which multiple different art styles are employed to give us a totally new aesthetic to the Wonder Woman story itself. Although there is a continuation of the traditional Wonder Woman storyline running into 2022, there are also some alternatives to the character that have been released right up until this year that give us a whole new look into how the character could be portrayed.
Number 5. Electro. The main Electro we've known for years is Maxwell Dillon, but there is a new Electro on the scene. This new Electro is Francine Fry. She was once the accomplice and love interest of Max, who died as a result of her love for him, and her obsession with villains and kinda her lust for them. While Max's powers were less in his control, Francine threw caution to the wind and decided to kiss him. Their kiss would result in her being electrified to death. However, she'd later be revived by Ben Reilly, operating as villain the Jackal, as part of a plot to help control Electro into basically doing his bidding. Turns out the DNA Reilly used to resurrect Francine in clone form was actually a mix of Maxwell's and her own as a result of that kiss, allowing her to harness and absorb electricity, chiefly the power of the suit that a depowered Max had at the time been given. Kissing Max once more, Francine absorbed the suit's powers, accidentally killing him in the process and becoming the new Electro. Max has since been resurrected, so now even more confusing, we have two Electros technically running around.
Up next, we're taking a look at Richard Fisk, now known as the Rose. The son of Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin, Richard would boast about how rich and powerful his father was, thinking he was just a highly successful businessman. Now, even if that was the case, like, come on, don't go around boasting about your parents' accomplishments. Live your own life. Well, that's exactly what Richard decided to do. Upon discovering his father was actually the kingpin of crime, Richard faked his own death and took on the moniker of the Schemer, attempting to take down his father's empire. The two would eventually reconcile after Richard felt bad about putting his dad into a coma. Fair enough. But this brings us to Richard's next moniker, the Rose. He now sported a purple mask and kept a rose in his front pocket and worked under his father, but secretly wanted to dismantle the Kingpin's organization from within. After killing a policeman in a shootout, however, Rose just realized he was a bad dude and allied himself with his father again, but then changed his mind and wanted to take over Kingpin's organization again. Just kill your dad or don't, man. It's a decision we all have to make at some point in our lives.
Number 3. Gray Goblin. Gabriel Stacy has been known by a few different names throughout the years, and has also had his backstory somewhat altered. Initially, we knew Gabe Stacy as Gray Goblin, and later as American Son in Age of Heroes. Originally, he was introduced to us as the son of Norman Osborn and Gwen Stacy, who basically had a secret love affair which resulted in the birth of two twin babies, Sarah and Gabriel. However, when Gabriel and Sarah were revealed to be the mysterious demonic villain returning from hell, known as Kindred, we learned that they were actually never really the natural born children of Norman and Gwen, thank goodness, but instead were clones that Harry Osborn had made, using their genetic material to get back at his father, tormenting him and making him think the two were really his children, when actually they weren't. It was all Harry's plot, ha ha ha. Not only did Gabriel have a completely different look as Kindred, but he also got a completely different backstory that explained away all the weirdness of his and Sarah's original origins. Which, I mean, thank you for that, because wow, that was bad. It was not good. I don't want Norman to sleep with Gwen. I'm not here for that.
This next baseball player turned villain is known as Frederick Myers, aka Boomerang, and he's gone through several changes, having worked under criminal organizations like the Sinister Syndicate, as an assassin, going up against a number of heroes, and of course, Spider-Man. So how did this boomerang-wielding baddie change? Well, he ended up aiding Black Widow, Maria Hill, and the Champions in their fight against Hydra, and cut a deal to get a full pardon for all his past crimes. That's pretty sweet. He later became Peter Parker's roommate in an attempt to get closer to Spider-Man as he was attempting to find the pieces of the Lifetime tablet. Though Boomerang was lying about his true motives to Spidey, saying he was only after the tablet to keep it away from Kingpin, this was quite the opposite actually, he was working for Kingpin. Despite his deception, however, Frederick actually formed a close bond with the hero and would go on to sacrifice his own life to save him during a fight with the vampiric villain Morlun.
Number 1. Green Goblin. Norman Osborn is often known as the villain the Green Goblin, one of Spider-Man's most iconic villains, if not the most iconic rogue he happens to have in his gallery. Their rivalry is an old one, going all the way back to the first appearance of the character in the 1960s, where Osborn actually first appeared not in his civilian form, but simply as the villain Green Goblin. But lately, Norman has had a change of heart, if you can believe that. It most certainly won't last forever, or at least I'd be very surprised if it did, but currently in the comics, Norman is actually one of the good guys for a change. This is after he had all of his sins purified by the villain known as Sin Eater. Initially, Peter as Spider-Man had saved Norman from Sin Eater, but after being taunted about Gwen, couldn't help but toss Green Goblin to the villain to be devoured, which, I mean, fair enough. But instead of perishing, Norman survived the encounter, no longer driven by madness, guilt, or rage. Having been purified, he was seemingly given a new lease on life, and currently remains one of the few villains purified by Sin Eater to stay that way. At least, so far. Number 10. Super-Skrull. Kl'rt might be recognizable when it comes to his character design, which admittedly has not changed that much over the years, but when it comes to his alignment, you might be somewhat surprised to learn where he is now, from where he started. Super-Skrull Kl'rt made his first appearance in Fantastic Four issue 18. Once again, the Skrulls attempted to invade Earth and planned on defeating the FF, this time with their secret weapon, the Super-Skrull, who seemed to possess all of the Fantastic Four's powers. Unfortunately, Mr. Fantastic and the team realized that these powers were likely not Super-Skrull's own, and suspected in fact that they were delivered to him from the Skrull homeworld. They used a device to jam the signal that was giving Kl'rt his powers, defeating him. Currently in the comics, Kl'rt serves Emperor Hulkling, and was for a time one of his trusted advisors. Kl'rt, however, was also the one who killed Hulkling's foster mother. Recently in Empire Aftermath, Kl'rt felt so awful about his past that he actually offered his life to the Emperor. Hulkling refused to accept it though, instead preferring to make Kl'rt work in the area of diplomacy so that he might make amends for all the lives that he had taken in times of war. He was like, no. Instead, you gotta save lives, and hopefully that'll make up for it. You can't just die on me, Kl'rt. Number 9. Hell's Bells. Hell's Bells was a group of villains who were all female mutants. The team was originally assembled by Cyber, who trained all of its members and consisted of Shrew, Briquette, Flame, Tremolo, and Vague. When Shrew betrayed them by testifying against them in order to get immunity for herself, the Hell's Bells banded together in an attempt to get revenge on her for betraying them. Eventually, they would be successfully taken into custody by X-Factor. Following the events of M-Day and Decimation, all team members save Briquette found themselves completely depowered. They still have operated as criminals in the comics, appearing in the Children of Adam series most recently, but they were a lot less scary because they had to rely on equipment and gadgets in place of, their own powers. Even without their powers, the team mainly stuck together though, minus Briquette and obviously Shrew. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want even more lists about Marvel villains you might not recognize or something in that realm, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8, Silver Samurai. While Silver Samurai looks much the same in the comics as he always has, not every iteration of him has been so recognizable. We've seen him turn up here and there on Krakoa recently. He seems to enjoy watching and participating in the friendly single combat matches in the Quarry, and in modern comics, he's recognizable. But how about in modern film? Well, Silver Samurai might not be a main character in Fox's mutant universe, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't exist. He actually made an appearance in the 2013 film The Wolverine. But although here he also seemingly looked the same, when it came to his armor at least, he couldn't be further from his comic book counterpart in actuality. That's because Silver Samurai here was an adamantium robot whom Wolverine had to battle against. Yeah, they made Keniyukio Harada robot armor. He was at least piloted by Ikiro Yoshida, who is obviously that film's version of Ken's own father in the comics. So, at least there was a little bit of a thing, but still, he wasn't even a person. He was just robot armor. Like, rude. Ken is a whole person, okay? It's not just armor. Number 7, Forearm. Forearm is Michael McCain. Originally, Michael was part of Strife's Mutant Liberation Front. He was one of the founding members, but would end up defeated by those that fought against him. Despite generally being on the side of the villains, Forearm was also welcomed onto the mutant island nation of Krakoa, where he could have a fresh start for himself. He accepted the offer and would end up joining Sword and being seen as a member of Magic's Dark Riders, who I think should get their own book. However, on Krakoa, he looks a bit different from his initial appearance, where he decidedly was showing a lot more forearm and had much less shirt. Forearm's mutant power is that he has 4 arms. Get it? Get it? His 4 arms. And now he wears shirts. Good for you, Forearm. Good for you. Although you can also not wear a shirt. You can not wear a shirt if you don't want to wear a shirt. Like, I'm not going to pressure anyone to wear shirts if they don't want to, or vice versa. I'm not going to pressure anyone to not wear a shirt if they're like, I like my shirt, let me keep my shirt. But I do like his new design as well. His new outfit is pretty cool. Number 6, Thanos. Thanos might look very similar to his initial appearance in the comics, and also looks quite similar on the big screen, but he's seen a pretty big change when it comes to what he's up to recently. In the comics, that is. In the MCU, he's mainly dead and gone, but there is a chance perhaps that he could return. Who knows? Not only have we now met Star Fox or Eros in the MCU, but in the comics, Thanos has become the new Prime Eternal, and as such, their new leader. That's right, this guy just went from being the baddest supervillain around to leader of a superhero team. Although we'll have to see where the Eternals' alignment is in the comics following the events of Avengers vs. X-Men vs. Eternals War, because that's probably going to be crazy. Also, I don't even know what the Eternals is really doing in that mix, but I'm here for it. I'm here to check that out.
And at number 5, we have Gambit. Back in 1990, when the character was introduced, he didn't strike me as much of a pretty boy as he seems to be portrayed today. But now, his charm has become actual part of his power set known as Hypnotic Charm. Now, with this new storyline being dropped later this month, I can't confirm what I don't know about the official 2022 version of the character, but in recent years, Gambit has changed quite a bit, at least in certain portrayals. Partly with his newer Hypnotic Charm power, but also with his abilities he acquired during his time as the Horseman of Death for Apocalypse. During this time, he gains a set of newer, darker abilities that usually aim to kill, and even further, after blinding himself with an exploding card, Gambit learns how to see the future somehow, which is a big deal for a character that has always otherwise just been concerned strictly with kinetic energy and things of the like. And although these days he has renounced the title of Horseman of Death, he still might have the ability to disintegrate his targets through molecular acceleration. In his new self-titled series, however, we'll see him paired up with a child version of Storm, which will tell the story of how Gambit came to be an X-Man. So maybe maybe the character will get back to something closer to his original portrayal, whether we want that or not, but we'll see. At number 4 is Iceman, another character that is being endowed with a whole new range to his power set. Iceman these days appears to have the ability to conjure up ice beasts on command and freeze his targets on a molecular level. Some argue that the level that Bobby Drake has brought his powers to at this point has given him status as an Omega mutant, which is a far cry from the days he was riding ice slides and throwing snowballs. Still having these ice slide abilities at his disposal, Iceman seems to favor his god level powers these days, and for good reason. I just didn't expect the young Robert Drake from the old X-Men cartoons to have come so far as to be able to create living beings from scratch, but crazier things have happened in the last few years. At number 3 we have Magneto, who seems to have reached a new level of power these days, with his magnetokinesis now being applied to the whole electromagnetic spectrum. He gains a whole new set of abilities. As of late, Magneto has been showing off his gravity-defying powers, radiation absorption, and even light manipulation, allowing him to turn himself and others invisible. So yeah, if you didn't think that having total control over all the metals in the universe was enough, Magneto is now these days able to control light. So there's that. I mean, to an extent. At one point he even makes Dazzler punch herself in the face with her own light-based powers, which is pretty OP if you ask me, but it's still the old Magneto we've always known somewhere in there. He looks roughly the same. He's just developed quite a bit since the old days, and we're excited to see where he goes from this year onward. At number 2 we have Jubilee. Jubilee has always typically been known as a bit of a pushover, having a pretty passive power set under her belt. She was able to shoot fireworks on command, and that was sort of it. She was always a fun person and was great at distracting enemies, but in terms of sheer power, she wasn't gonna land high on a list if she was ranked among her peers. But in the last couple of years, this character has undergone a total transformation, and what turns out to be known as lumikinetic explosive light blasting is a power that could be tapped more than just creating small bursts of fireworks on command. These days, Jubilee is able to create literal explosions, sometimes even considered to be nuclear level. Not only this, but over the last couple of years, she has also spent a good stint as a vampire, which just makes the character even more different from what we've always been used to leading into 2022. At number 1, we have Batman from Dark Knights of Steel. In this new limited series that is being released as we speak, if you're watching this in 2022 when it was posted, Batman is being given a total medieval makeover. Along with other DC characters, Batman navigates a medieval landscape of dragons and ancient magic, donning not only a suit of armor but a sword as well, which really takes the concept of the Dark Knight to more of a literal degree than I think any of us were ever expecting. But honestly, it works for me. These days, Batman has become a character, and a franchise for that matter, that is being openly explored through various different lenses in the comics and in the movies. And people seem to be openly inviting more and more off-the-walls portrayals of the character, no matter how different they appear from the original. And in the Dark Knights of Steel, we're seeing yet another example of this, where Batman isn't even being set in the same time period anymore. But even though he may be somewhat unrecognizable from, let's say, the Tom King series, I feel like this has become something that fans of Batman have gotten used to over the years. At number 10 is Despero. Although Despero has always been totally jacked, he was originally known as more of a threat to the Justice League through mind manipulation. During the Silver Age, he would only typically use his telepathic powers before anything else, but these days, it's a different story. Although these changes did start to take place way back in the 80s, the character has come a long way since the days when he would sit on his throne and twiddle his fingers most of the time. Now, he seems to do a lot of the grunt work himself, even looking larger in size these days than ever before. And even outside of the comics, Despero's appearance in the Arrowverse offers a totally different look into the villain. He takes on a human form for much of the time, who is, well, let's just say he's not as big as Despero, nor does he have much musculature to him, no offense to that actor. Nor does he have a third eye or anything that a comic book fan would expect, and when he's in proper form, he just seems a lot less demonic and cunning, more like Hellboy's very serious detective older brother, or something like that. At number 9, we have Anton Arcane. The penultimate villain to Swamp Thing, Anton Arcane has always been a threat as one of the most prolific evil scientists in all of DC. But when Swamp Thing finally killed kills Anton during one of their many confrontations, back in 2016 I think, the villain goes to hell and basically becomes a demon. Having been a pretty tame foe for most of the Swamp Thing comics, Anton Arcane's physical changes have made him almost unrecognizable now that he's a demon. And what's worse is that he continues to bother Swamp Thing and his niece Abigail, but now with the added demonic powers in mind. So he's changed quite a bit, both in looks and power set. At number 8 we have Psycho Pirate. The way that this villain has changed since the Infinite Crisis event is unmatched. Although he looks relatively the same, he's gained such a power boost that he now works with the likes of Darkseid and Alexander Luthor. After surviving the crisis, he comes out on top, getting his hands on what's known as the Medusa Mask. And what this helps him do is basically summon beings from the old multiverse, which, as you can imagine, is a very powerful ability, especially directly following the event itself. And even though he's been killed by Black Adam during the events of Blackest Night, Psycho Pirate's corpse is brought back to life as a Black Lantern. And as you can imagine, this gives him a whole new look and increases his power level. He loses the Medusa Mask in this ghoulish form, but even without it, he appears totally different than how we're used to seeing him. At number 7 we have Doomsday. The primary change with Doomsday isn't something that's been gained, but something that's been lost. A very notable power of his actually, and that is his hyper adaptability ability. In fact, I would even argue that this was his main power, and what it meant was he could learn from past losses in battle and change his physiology to prevent himself from being killed in the same way twice. I don't know why this has been dropped, because aside from it being the defining characteristic of Doomsday, it was just a really fun ability to watch because it made every encounter with the villain a new challenge for the heroes, which would ultimately make for an exciting read. But for whatever reason, this power has basically been left in the dust, making Doomsday that much less unique from any other bruiser type villain, at least in my opinion. At number 6 we have Dr. Octopus. Something that the less avid readers may not know about this villain is that he's been going back and forth between heroism and villainy for some time now. And not only that, Otto Octavius has recently taken on the mantle of Spider-Man, donning the superior Spider-Man armor outfitted with the mechanical arms and everything. He's also been taken over by Venom recently, as well as the Carnage symbiote. Although he's known to be back to his evil ways and his classic suit in 2022, there is no telling if he'll jump back into the Spidey suit once more. He's already gone back and forth a number of times, even in the last few years, so I wouldn't be surprised if he did it again.
Number 5, Rhino. Rhino was given a completely new look for his appearance in the second Amazing Spider-Man film. Honestly, Rhino is a hard villain to do in live action, I feel like, so I'm not surprised with the direction that they went with, but also, what a weird direction to go in for that character, considering what they're actually supposed to be like in the comics. In the comics, Rhino is Alexei Sistovich, who is genetically altered and then bonded to a suit of armor that increases his strength and durability. Basically, he's given like a mechanical rhino skin, but like the skin. The armor was modeled after a rhinoceros, as they are known in nature for being relentless when it comes to their assault and extremely hard to defeat due to their tough hide. Rhino, however, has never been known for being very smart, which makes him fairly easy to defeat usually, which seems to be the same idea when it came to his cinematic counterpart. However, the whole design for this character was definitely different than the comic book counterpart, whose armor was much less mech-like or robotic and is more like just the tough hide of a rhino. Really, he kind of just looks like a guy in a rhino suit in the comics. Also, Alexei is just super jacked in the comics, and his cinematic counterpart didn't seem so jacked. He was just like a guy in a suit. Of course, Alexei does get a lot of his jackedness as well from his whole rhino thing, but he also, I think, was jacked still to begin with, I'm pretty sure. He's just more jacked. Number 4, Legion. Legion has a new look in X-Men Onslaught Revelation. This one-shot is kind of like the bookend for the Way of X limited series if you were checking that out, which I personally haven't read all of, but I will say the parts of it that I have read have been strictly excellent, so I would recommend Way of X to anyone that's interested. If you like the idea of pondering the why in life and beliefs, and you enjoy philosophical prose, this is really a great series for you. In Onslaught Revelation, Nightcrawler, Legion, Pixie, and Dust come together to try and defeat the resurrected Onslaught, who has been slowly returning with each resurrection, residing as pieces in the minds of all mutants. In order to help in the fight against Onslaught, Legion makes his mind a safe space for all mutants to come through, in essence also fully connecting with Krakoa and kind of becoming a sort of hive mind if necessary. As such, he gets a redesign, though he still gets to keep the wild shape of his hair that we've all come to recognize so well, and that I've really come to love. Legion, moving forward after the defeat of Onslaught, will also keep this look as he becomes the newly created religion's church. That's right, Legion is the church. He's the building. In essence, people can come into his mind to worship, find community, and seek sanctuary. It's like a nice safe space for people to come and just like be and feel good. It's awesome. I love that Legion is the church. I just think that's great. Number 3, Donald Blake. Donald Blake ended up becoming a villain recently in the comics, which is a pretty big change for a guy who was once also the mighty hero Thor. Donald Blake used to be Thor's human form, but in reality was kind of his own person, or he kind of ended up becoming his own person. He was created by Odin to be a human host for Thor, but after Thor died at the hands of the Serpent, Blake became separated from Thor and became his own separate entity. Eventually, he would end up going to the Enchantress for help, only for her to use him to make her own villainous creature referred to as the Keep. Basically, she killed Donald Blake and then used his blood to make the Keep, and we haven't seen the Keep in a while, but I'm sure he's out there somewhere. After Amora and the Keep were defeated by Thor, Blake was laid to rest, living on as a disembodied head in a dream world that was crafted for him. Well, living on as a person in the dream world, but he was just a disembodied head. But he was asleep, so he was dreaming. Eventually, though, Blake came to realize that this world wasn't real, and awoke from his dream, seeking revenge on all Thors across the multiverse for what had happened to him. And don't worry, he wasn't just a head then, he had a body then. He would end up being defeated by 616 Thor in the end, and then made into the God of Lies, as per Thor's brother Loki's suggestion. Thor was like, what do we do with this guy? We shouldn't kill this guy. He's Donald Blake. Loki's like, nah, let's make him the God of Lies. Seems to fit considering everything Donald Blake has been through. Number 2, Taskmaster. Taskmaster is Anthony Masters and is known for being an unstoppable foe. He can master pretty much any skill he can observe. Some would say he's a taskmaster, which makes him a deadly opponent. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we were also introduced to Taskmaster, but the character was changed somewhat for the film in which they were introduced, Black Widow. Instead, Antonia Dreykov, the daughter of General Dreykov, the man behind the Red Room, was Taskmaster. When Black Widow left the Red Room and became an Avenger, she believed she had killed Dreykov, sadly also having to kill his daughter, who basically led them to their target. She was a casualty of the explosion, intended to kill Dreykov himself. Instead, Antonia was actually badly injured and ended up surviving, but her face was permanently scarred. She then became Dreykov's weapon, having studied the moves of the Avengers and having their fighting styles basically uploaded into her brain, allowing her to mimic all their various moves and making her a hard opponent for Black Widow to defeat. Quite different from the comic book version, but still really cool and badass as an alternate version of the character, I think. Number 1, Cyber. Cyber has come a long way when it comes to his look in the comics. Granted, Cyber has also come back a lot of times, so I guess it kind of makes sense that he would look different. He made his first appearance in Marvel Comics Presents in issue 85 in the 90s, where he was introduced to us as a cyborg-appearing Wolverine villain who was hired by General Koi, another enemy of Logan's. Back then, he was just a smile and a coat with a hat on. Currently, however, his design is much different, and he doesn't even go by the name Cyber anymore, instead being known as Hornet in the comics in his newest body.